Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you back to this series about the problem with the emergence of Islam. And as you have noticed so far, we've been basing this particular series on the work of Dan Gibson. And with me here in studio is Dr. Jay Smith, who have done an amazing job articulating the arguments and also sharing with us new information that have yet to be shared with others. Right now, Dr. Jay, we are going to continue our discussion in terms of the geography of the Quran and some of the problems that are found in there.
Actually, we're going to move right into the Qiblas because the geographical problems all have to do with the Qibla. So when you look at the geographical problems that we referred to with Ad and Thamud, Ad, we now know that Thamud is after Ad.
Correct.
And then, of course, Midian. Those three peoples and those three areas, which is really Edomites, who then become the Nabateans. These Nabateans is who we're going to zero in on because the Nabateans are the whole crux of what Islam became.
That's right.
And another subsidiary way of proving this, what Dan did, was to go and look at the mosques. And that's where his book on the Qiblas came out in 2017, 2 years ago. And what he found was fascinating. We spoke about this last year. All the mosques up until 706. Remember, Muhammad died in 632. The Qibla was canonized in 621, right, while Muhammad was still living in Mecca. That was where he went up. That's where the Surah 2, Ayah 145 refers to the fact that the Qibla would be no longer from Jerusalem. It would be down. It would be redirected down to Mecca. It doesn't say Mecca, it just says the place of the Prophet. This is one of the real frustrations about the Quran. There's no Mecca there. It's just been assumed this is Mecca by later Muslims. But that would have been, so you're talking about early 620s is where the canonization takes place, which means every mosque everywhere from that time on, which means any mosque, because there were no mosques built before that time, should be facing Mecca.
Correct.
Directed towards Mecca.
That's the logic.
That's logical. So he went and he assumed that was going to be correct until he went to 65 different mosques, and he noticed that none of the mosques in the 7th century were facing Mecca at all. They were all facing Petra in Jordan, which is the seat of the Nabatean kingdom, which is one of the Nabatean tomb cities. It's a city of tombs and temples. That's why you see those beautiful carved out structures there with using many different architectural styles, the Greek style, the Italian style, the Egyptian style, the Mesopotamian style, because these people lived in those places. They'd come back to Petra, they'd come back to Medina Salah on their hajjs, their pilgrimages every year to celebrate their identity as Nabateans. Now, it stands to reason then that the mosques that they created wherever they lived, and remember, these were travelers, these were merchants. They were living as far away as China. Remember what we said in the earlier episodes. They would go and live there so they would get the cheaper prices. So when the merchants, the other Nabatean merchants would come, they would then sell it to them. These were their cousins. These were their uncles.
That's right.
And that's why they got preferential treatment. But they were also the ones that only knew how to get back and forth because they were using navigational systems that even today are amazingly accurate. And that's why when he looked at these mosques, these Qiblas, the direction of prayer were all facing towards the Nabatean city of tombs and temples.
That's right.
Their sanctuary.
So they're continuing that spiritual connection, if you wish.
Continuing that spiritual connection. And also making sure that identity in their homeland remained intact. Because they did have an empire, like you had an empire, everybody has empires, which gives you an identity. Where was their identity going to come from? Two things, the language and the place.
Right.
The place of the ancestors, the place of our peoples, the places of our families, where all our ancestors are buried.
Right.
So with that in mind, can you then understand why all these mosques? Now, when you look, let me just look. People have said, all right, and there has always been this criticism of the different directions in mosques. And most of scholars, modern as well as earlier scholars, have always said it's because they didn't know their directions very well. If they didn't know the directions very well, how did they ever get from A to B? How did they get all the way to China? How did they get all the way to India?
Exactly.
How did they get across the desert? Why was it they were the ones that were used by the Romans and all the other peoples to get their goods for them? Because no one could get across the desert but these people, because there were no roads there. The Roman roads did not go across the deserts. They did not go across the deserts of Arabia, nor across the deserts of North Africa, the Sahara. Only these Nabateans could do this. So that's why it stands to reason these people did know their direction very well. Now, let's look at, I'm going to put up a graph on the screen here. Let's take a look at this graph. Here are 4 different sets of Qibla. This is what Dan found. This is not a ulta-pulta all over the place. Actually, they fall into 4 different categories.
Correct.
The first category are the Petran mosques, the Petran Qiblas. These are up until 706. Every mosque is facing Petra. So you're talking about 17 or 18 mosques that he's discovered so far. They're all uniquely facing Petra. Nowhere else but Petra. Then in 706, a new Qibla was formed, and there were about eight of these mosques that were facing what he calls it an in-between location. This is a location exactly halfway between Petra and Mecca.
It's almost a transitional one.
It looks like this, either transitional, it's not transitional actually.
Or maybe
it's
confusion.
by Al-Hajjaj, not even a confusion, it's actually purposeful. It's Al-Hajjaj who is angered by what he sees in Petra, by the idolatry that is going there. He is very religious.
So there is a split.
He's a split, and he demands that all those who are in allegiance to him have their mosque exactly between, because he's not willing to go with Ibn Zubair, who's down in Mecca now.
That's right.
He's not willing to go with him yet, because he is against the Umayyads. Al-Hajjaj still has an allegiance to the Umayyads, but he's absolutely upset with the Umayyads, because they become so idolatrous. So he demands, says, for those people who follow me, those mosques, you do somewhere in between. Because you take a look and see where this in between is, it's nowhere. There's no city there. There's nothing there of note, except it's exactly halfway between Petra and Mecca. So this is a political statement, is what he's saying.
It's kind of middle ground.
It's a middle ground, and also he's probably hedging his bets, wanting to know who's going to have ascendancy. Is Ibn Zubayr and the Abbasids in the south, are they going to come to the fore? Or are the Umayyads in the north, who are headquartered up in Damascus? The Abbasids are headquartered in, remember, their headquarters is in Baghdad now. Who's going to come to the fore? Their headquarters in Baghdad, but their sanctuary is Mecca. The Umayyads are headquartered up in Damascus, but their sanctuary is Petra. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go halfway in between and see who wins out on this. All right?
Right.
So hold on to that. That starts in 706 and goes to 744 when he dies. He dies in 745, so do his Qiblas die with him. Isn't that interesting? It all follows one man.
Right? It's
Now,
always the story.
It's always the one story, okay?
Yeah.
Now, so where does Mecca play into this? Why is it we don't see anything in Mecca? Mecca doesn't come into the picture until 727. In 727, we find the first. Now, it could be that we just haven't found any ones earlier than that. We don't know. There's no way we could. But the first one that Dan's found that's facing Mecca is way over in Pakistan, in Banbor. And that one is facing Mecca, 727. When did I say the Qibla began? When was it canonized?
621.
621. This is 100 years later. They finally get Mecca on the map. And, oh, did I say on the map? No, they don't get it on the map.
And yeah, it's not there
There's not
until
even
later.
reference to Mecca until 740.
That's right.
So this even predates the first reference we have. And now the reference we have is from outside. That shows that Mecca was still in its infancy. It still had not made it into the world stage. It's still, no one knew about it yet. There was no people writing about it. That takes another 15 to 16 years before someone even notes that it's there. And that's the Byzantia Arabica, written in 740. That's the first time to refer to this city called Mecca. Now, while that's all happening, around 732, so we're talking about roughly 5 to 6 years later, come back to this graph, take a look there. You now have what we call parallel mosques.
Right.
These parallel mosques, interestingly, are only found in North Africa. They're only found also in Spain.
Andalusia, basically.
Why do you think what do you think's going on here?
It seemed like there is, if we take the political approach, there is no allegiance to any. You know, they just decided that let's just be neutral.
Ah, okay. And that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing Al-Hajj did.
That's right.
But they're way over in North Africa, so there's not much control over them coming from either the Umayyads or the Abbasids. They know that one of these two powers either is going to retain its power or the other one's going to usurp that power, and they want to make sure that they don't put their allegiance with either one of the two powers. So they're putting theirs parallel to the line between Petra and Mecca.
That's right.
Isn't that fascinating? Now let's take a look at the graph, and let's just take a look at these. I want you to look at the graph there. There are the mosques all facing Petra in the left-hand sky. And then when you look over on the right, take a look at the lines, the Qibla lines coming in. Those are the red lines coming in. Look how accurate they are.
That's right. I mean, it's not a coincidence. You cannot say it's a coincidence when you have that many facing exactly that direction.
Look how far out they're coming from. Look at that graph there. All the Qibla. Look how Guangzhou, that's Canton today, what we would call Canton, just out not too far from Hong Kong. That is the oldest mosque we see in that part of the world. It's still, the structure is still there. You can see the Qibla wall, and that's where using the Aster satellite, which is the most accurate satellite in the world today,
right,
he was able to show that it was within 2 degrees off of
right,
Petra. Thousands of miles away. Look at Cheraman down in South India, on the western coast of India, in Kerala. Look how accurate that is. Almost exactly towards Petra. Nowhere near Mecca. Now let's look at the in-between ones. Here's the in-between ones. Those that you can see, almost halfway between Petra and Mecca. There are the 8 of them. And they are all following Al-Hajjaj.
That's right.
And that's why we know that they're there. And the reason why we know that they're right there is because of the Wasit one, the one on the right. It's coming at a completely different angle, yet it also corresponds with the other ones coming down from the north.
Did he find any monument in there or anything that
Nothing.
could?
Which means this has nothing to do with a city, nothing to do with a sanctuary, nothing to do with anything other than a political statement. And of course, it's Al-Hajjaj, who is the governor of Kufa, who is demanding that they all do this. And that's why those mosques in that area are all facing there. When you finally get Mecca, let's go back up again. They're the Meccan mosques. They only start to appear in 727. And they don't really take over complete control until 876. It takes them 200 years after, more than 200 years after Muhammad dies before every mosque is facing Mecca. So you can see there's still a lot of political unrest. This all has to do with politics. This has nothing to do with theology. It's all political.
Right.
And then we get the parallel mosques over here. Let's put those up there. If you could just show these. There's the parallel mosques. They're the
Obviously,
Qibla
they're
number 4.
strange in their direction because they're not facing anywhere. But when you compare it to the line between Petra and Mecca, you can see at least
that they're parallel.
There is something going on here.
Okay. Now, let's see. People have come back and they've said, okay, that's okay, Mr. Smith, and that's okay, Dan Gibson, but really, the most accurate mosque Qiblas are the Meccans. So they got it better. They just did not know their direction. Dan took that on board, and I want you to now put up look at this graph here. There is the Petra between Peril and Mecca that I've talked about before. Look and see how accurate. If we took what Dan did, he took all the measurements for all the mosques from the different locations, and he found that the Petra mosques, which were 17, they were average 2.9 degree of accuracy. If you take out the 2 worst ones, it's 1.9 degree of accuracy, under 2%. And they are by far the most outspread. You would think that they would by far be the least accurate.
Correct.
The ones that the most accurate are the ones from Al-Hajjaj, which is only 0.98, less than 1%, because they're so close. That would make sense that they're so close. Interestingly, the parallel mosques are 3.5 degrees of accuracy.
Still better than Mecca.
Mecca is the worst. So this idea that somehow by the time they got to Mecca, they finally got it correct, whereas everybody didn't know what they're doing beforehand, is completely debunked by what Dan has found. Using that argument, he said, let's take a look and see. And this is why it's so important that we do what Dan does. Dan is very careful that he's very careful to make sure that when he does a measurement or when he makes a claim, he has gone to the place, he's physically looked at the walls, he has asked the questions that we're all asking, and he did the equations and he looked at and he got the results. Once he wrote it out, he got an awful lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. But he is now answering those criticisms. So what we're going to do next, in the next episode, we're going to then look and see how he got his measurements, how he actually got his Qibla measurement, why they were so accurate.
In other words, we are going now to deal with some of that criticism
Yep.
that was being received. And that's really brand new material, actually. In fact, you can go to our previous series from last year's called The Unknown History of Islam, and you can get even an in-depth explanation of these different qiblas. But today we did kind of like an overview, but obviously we are building up a foundation to deal with new material that has to do with the criticism that was received. Thank you, Dr. J, and thank you to all of you. God bless. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, hit the bell so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/CIRA International. And together we can introduce Muslims to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you.